Hey everybody, welcome back to Part-Time Tabletopper. Adam here, long time no see. Today we're going to be going back to basics, and I'm going to show you how I made one of the first sets of crafted items that I'd ever done. It's something that's super reusable. I feel like everybody who plays D&D, tabletop, and likes using miniatures and terrain should have a set of this. I am going to show you how I made my set of forest ruins. So I'm showing you the largest piece right here, which is the ruined cathedral, but there's going to be a number of pieces that we make here all at once. I particularly liked the forest aesthetic, so I made mine forest ruins, but you could do yours in a tundra or in the desert or keep it super neutral. Totally up to you, but either way, you can follow these step-by-step instructions to make a set just for you. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's start with materials. First things first, we're going to need some 1-inch thick XPS foam that we're going to cut down into varying sizes, as well as some really thin dollar store foam board, and then also some MDF board that we're going to use as our base. We're also going to need various things to cut with, like these scissors, a hobby knife, and an alpha blade. You'll see I have a wire brush there that we're going to use for some texturing later on. I also have sandpaper, I have a straight edge for the sake of making our bricks, as well as that coffee can with the rocks and the foil balls that we'll use to texture bricks later on. We also have foam-safe black spray paint, tacky glue, hot glue, and some chipboard, which you can get off of a cereal box. I'm going to be making 5 pieces in total, so we're going to cut down some MDF board into some rough shapes for the shape of the ruins that I'm going to have. It's worth your time to sand down the edges so that there's a smooth transition onto your gaming table. It just helps it look more immersive. I'm going to take that dollar store foam board and cut it down to make my walls. You could use cardboard for this as well, I just chose to use the foam board. So I want to measure it out and make sure that the heights of all of these are uniform and match up, but after you do that, I'm just going to roughly draw out the shapes of the ruins. Great thing about ruins is that they're very forgiving about what you do because these are crumbled buildings, they're not supposed to be perfect. Once they're all cut out, I'm going to use hot glue to fasten the walls together and to fasten them down to the MDF board bases. So I have my 4 smaller pieces in the back, but I wanted to have one large centerpiece, which is going to be my ruined cathedral. I cut out this 1-inch thick piece of XPS foam and measured it out to be 4 by 8. This is going to be the center, and I wanted it to be elevated a little bit more to really accentuate its size. A pro tip here if you decide to do the cathedral is when you're measuring out these walls, because the foundation is 1 inch above the base, you want to make sure that you give yourself an extra inch on the bottom of all of these walls so that when you're gluing it together, the doors and the windows all line up properly with where the floor is. So because the door is elevated, we need steps going up. I cut out some steps that are the width of the door, I believe about 2 inches, and then I made the height of those 2/3 of an inch and 1/3 of an inch, so that way the steps are level as they're going up. I'm also going to, just for the sake of aesthetics, going to put some bracers on the side of it. I think that's the word, bracers. Either way, some stone railings on the side of it so that it just looks a little bit better. Make sure you use a rock or a foil ball to texture those as well. So one step we're going to do now to save a huge headache in the future is to do an undercoat of black, a base coat. I'm going to use a foam safe spray paint, but you can use regular paint if you want. The idea behind doing this is that after we lay our bricks down, we don't want there to be any white or green or pink or anything like that shining out from behind them. We want it all to be black. Now, speaking of the bricks, you're seeing me begin the process of making mine. I like the method of taking a huge piece of dollar store foam board, you peel off the paper, get out a straight edge, and I admit this does take quite a bit of time, but truthfully all brick cutting does. I am going to measure out rectangles that are 1 inch by 1/2 inch on this board. I'm going to trace them, and then I am going to cut all of them out. After I do that, I'm going to put them inside of a shaker filled with rocks and foil balls, right here, this coffee tin that you see here, and I am going to shake those all around to texture them. You also saw right there too, speaking of the black undercoat, this is what they look like. You see that I also made some 1 inch by 1 inch squares as well, and I decided to do that because I wanted that to be the base of this cathedral instead of the traced ones that I had made previously, only because I think it makes it look a little bit more natural if they're offset from each other. So to put those on, we're going to use tacky glue. You could also use hot glue if you prefer that method, but you do have to be a little bit quicker and precise with your laying if you do it that way. So because I wanted a fast dry time, I opted for the hot glue here, and I do believe when I laid bricks on the walls of the ruins, I did a combination of both. Now the trick for laying stone or brick is that they are in an offset pattern. So even though I have a bunch of uniform size bricks, as I'm going here, you can see that I'm cutting some of them down and staggering them to varying sizes so that it lines up with the shape of the walls, as well as, just having a natural stone look. Here's what it looks like on the cathedral, and you can also see that I put some rubble on the side, as well as these little decorative pillars that I thought looked cool. So a totally optional thing you can do here that I'm opting to do is create a door. Now this is a ruined cathedral, so the door wouldn't be standing, but I thought it would look cool if the door had been laid out on the floor. I'm using this dollar store foam board to trace a shape of a door in and an arch. I drew in a wood pattern, and I'm using this wire brush to create a wood texture. I'm going to cut it out with a hobby knife and also trace that wood pattern onto the sides so that you notice those. Just little details make a difference. And then I'm going to use chipboard as well as these necklace rings to go ahead and make the door handles. Also, you see I forgot to texture these a little bit more, so I'm going to do that as well. Another minor detail I'm going to do is take this hobby knife and go through the windows and doors, and any place that I see a stone or a brick hanging over, I'm just going to trim that out to make it look a little bit more flush. Here's our supply list for the painting. We're going to need some paint brushes in varying sizes and styles, including either a dry brush or a makeup brush that we're going to use for dry brushing. We also have Mod Podge, and you could have some regular PVA glue handy as well. We have black paint, brown, pewter gray, pale gray, white, honey, and then a khaki or a tan. I also have some black and some brown wash that I've homemade using Black Magic Crafts improved recipes, and then I have some Citadel shades, specifically Agrax Earth Shade and Rakeland Flesh Shade. Finally, it's not pictured here, but you are going to need some sand or something similar to sand. We're going to start with a base coat of black paint and Mod Podge mixed together, and I'll explain why in just a second. But before we do, while that base coat is wet, you'll see that I'm sprinkling sand along these exposed edges here so that it accentuates the ruined look and helps with the texture. Now, the reason we use that black paint and Mod Podge mixed together is because, one, it gives us a nice dark base coat, just like the other base coat we did in case anything shines through the paint, and two, it just helps with the waterproofing as well. Now, I'm using pewter gray as the base coat for all of the stones. This is by far my favorite color, just because it really is a nice warm gray that looks like stone. Here is where those shades come into play. So I'm going to be individually highlighting specific stones in random patterns so that I have a natural look when all of this is said and done. You could totally use normal acrylics for this, but the reason I choose to use the shades, even though they're a little bit more expensive, is because they still help show that gray underneath, and it's more like they're complementing the pewter gray as opposed to contrasting it. So here's where that honey brown comes into play. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the shades, but I'm going to be very sparse and specific with this just because it is a pretty stark contrast to what's already there, but it does help add variety. Now we're going to begin the dry brushing stage. I'm going to start off with that khaki camel color that I have, and just in nice circular and up and down motions, I'm going to dry brush all of these bricks to slowly blend these colors together. It's also going to help highlight the edges, or not the edges, well yeah, actually it will. It'll help highlight the edges, the highlights of the brick, and also deepen the recesses. Time to follow that up with a dry brush of the pale gray. Finally, only on the highest points of the edges and only in a downward motion, dry brush very lightly with that white. Truthfully, you could leave it looking exactly like this if you want it to have like a cold, dry look, but I prefer blending it all together and dampening it down with a wash. So I'm going to be using a homemade black wash here and also a homemade brown wash. I'm having this water handy because I like a streaking effect with the black wash. Now, I have mine in a spray bottle here for convenience, but you could put yours on with a paintbrush. Once that wash is on, I'm going to dampen everything up with just a couple sprays of the water. Definitely don't overuse it or all the wash is going to fall off. And then while that's wet, I am just going to stipple some brown paint over the build here so that that black and the brown kind of sporadically and chaotically blend together. So here's where the build really starts to come alive. I clearly have a lot of different flocking and gamer grass and trees and things like that that I've collected over the years. You do not necessarily have to go out and buy everything you see here, but as we go through, you'll see that I'm using a lot of different gamer grass and woodland scenics products to bring this to life. So first things first is we're going to make some ground texture. We're going to use some PVA glue, or you could use that Mod Podge we used earlier, as well as some brown paint and sand. I also add just a little bit of black paint because my brown that I have in the larger size there wasn't dark enough. Now we are going to mix this together. I'm doing this all by eye. I don't have exact measurements, and you can even see that I'm going to add some extra glue here because it ended up being a little bit too chunky. But once that's done, we're going to go ahead and use this as our base. So in retrospect, I should have put this tree on the MDF base before I put the ground texture down. So just to be safe, I'm going to use super glue to make sure I get a really strong bond and a little bit of hot glue for the fast immediate bond. That should work just fine. So I like using these dried oregano flakes as fallen leaves, and because this is a forest, I think that is essential if you want it to have that forest look. So to get those glued down, I'm going to water down a little bit of Mod Podge here, mix that up, and just spread it all over the ground texture, as well as spots where I want those leaves to sit. The trick with these leaves, as well as the rest of the flocking we're going to use later on, is to really just make sure that it kind of lightly rains and sprinkles down as opposed to dumping it all on. That was an earth blend you saw me just put on right now, and then even after that, I'm going to use just a tiny bit of a bright green. So we're going to do the same thing with the cathedral here, but with one extra step. Because this building doesn't have a roof, but all of that floor is still intact, I want it to look like leaves have fallen in here over time. So I am also going to make sure that those dried oregano flakes get spread on the inside of this building. And just to make sure all of that flocking stays down, I'm going to use a spray PVA adhesive here. You want to make sure whatever you use, it's something that's going to dry matte and not sticky. To really lean into this being an old ruin and that it's in a foresty area, we're going to add moss. So I'm going to take a tacky glue and just dump that and spread it into the recesses and the crevices and random spots. Then I'm going to take a medium green flocking that I have and sprinkle that over the area where I added glue. You'll see me tapping that in here just to make sure the flocking and the glue blend together and that it gets down into the recesses. Then I shake off the excess and what you have is a very old mossy looking wall. It takes some time, but once you do that to every single wall on both sides, this is what you get. So I'm going to elevate these even further. Again, you could be done at this point, but if you want to keep going like I am, I'm going to take some woodland scenic bushes and some gamer grass and army painter grass and tufts and flowers and things like that, and just decorate the bases of these to really give it some foliage, some vegetation, some variety, and help it look as real and diorama-like as possible. My final step involves better gameplay functionality. I want these to be as versatile and fun to use on the table as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and add some platforms on the top levels of some of these taller ruin pieces. That way, whether it's an old floor or maybe some beams that some bandits or orcs or goblins or somebody put up there, there's a place where you can put your miniatures to add some elevation to this as well. The idea with these toothpicks here is to use some super glue and just make them look like they are support beams that are helping hold these up. I feel like once upon a time I saw somebody else do this and thought that was a cool idea, so I have been doing it ever since as well. To go along with the ruin pieces, I made a few little, I can't remember if these are toothpicks or dowels, but usually I use toothpicks, so we'll just say these are toothpick ladders. That way there's a way for the miniatures to quote-unquote get up to those platforms. Now the last thing I'm going to do, because I don't like the look of the really polished and sanded dowels, toothpicks, and craft sticks here, I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade and use that as like a wood stain, and just paint all of these to darken them up a little bit. And this is what it looks like when it's all done. And that's it. If you follow those instructions, you will have your own set of ruins ready to use and play on the table. I love this set. I've already used it in my current D&D campaign. Speaking of which, that's why I've been a little late on the videos. All of my free time outside of work and family and friends has gone toward that as opposed to making these videos. But I do have a few on the way. I've got a desert town that I constructed, and I'm going to show you guys how I made that. I've got a desert board that I made that's similar and goes along with it, and a couple other really cool videos that I'm going to try to edit and put out really soon. So let me know if you guys like this, like the video, because it helps other people find it. I know the crafting content right now isn't super popular on YouTube, so just anything you can do to help other people see it helps. And then obviously, if you want to see more videos, please subscribe. And in the meantime, happy crafting, happy gaming, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.